Hello, welcome to Open Oven. My name is Mike Smith. I am not a chef. I'm just a guy who likes to cook. And today we're going to do a very famous recipe around this part. Certainly, if really anywhere in Canada, we're going to make cabbage rolls. Now, I know I'm going to have, some Ukrainian and Polish grandmas getting upset at me and telling me that's not how you make cabbage rolls. There are a million recipes for sure. Again, the idea of the show is I want to try to come up with a simple, fairly simple recipe, something that, pretty much anybody can make. And certainly there'll be a fair number of experts in the cabbage roll making, probably much more experts than I am. So we're going to get that oil going. We're going to start with our ground beef. And there's a catch with the ground beef. In that, remember, we're using a filling. So our ground beef and our rice are going to be our filling. And so we want to cook that until it's no longer pink. You don't want to cook it any farther than that. You don't want it cooked all the way, because of course it's going to continue cooking in the oven when we put it in as our filling with our cabbage rolls. All right, we'll get that sizzling. Same idea with the rice. We went ahead and cooked our rice ahead of time. That's one of the, depending on your prep time, that's one of the things. If you have a rice cooker, I actually don't recommend using a rice cooker for this, because what you want to do is you want to use a long grain rice, preferably, not an instant rice, and you want to actually cook it, but leave about the last 3-4 minutes and take it out. You want it to have a little bit of firmness still. Again, the only reason is that you're going to finish cooking that rice when it goes into the cabbage roll and goes into the oven. So you really don't have to. Okay, I'm going to just let that brown. Just trying to get a little bit smaller piece. And we'll get some of the ingredients going, including our onion. I'm going to try to cut the onion. Going to put some garlic in there. We want it to be relatively small pieces, not big thick parts. Generally, when I cook with onion, I like to keep the pieces small. I'm not a person who likes big chunks of onion, so we're going to try to make that small. And if I got to cut it a couple times, we will. These long strips. And again, we don't really need to be cooking this. So I'm just going to put this aside. We're going to end up adding it near the end before we're about to cool it. Starting to cry. Must be very sad. Sad onions. The onion odor gets to me sometimes. I don't know, not always, but today obviously. All right, we're going to take, if you're cooking an entire meal of cabbage rolls, you could obviously use 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. We're going to use just a small amount. Got about 1 small clove here. I'm going to shred that. I find with these shredders, often you can shred it, but you've got to go ahead and pick the garlic out after that. So there we go. I'm just going to push that off to the side because we're going to end up scraping this whole cutting board into the pan. So pull that garlic out of there. Have a piece of paper towel. All right. I'm going to use a little bit of dill. I'm going to chop it pretty fine. Really kind of small pieces. And I'm just going to use the flower part. I'm not going to use the stem. You could if you like to. Really small. We're just going to use that. Obviously, that's going to flavor it up. If you don't want to use dill, you don't have to use dill. If you want to just use parsley or something like that, you can. Okay, we're just browning that. Flip it till we get rid of all the pink. Salt and pepper. We'll kind of add salt and pepper as we go. And again, if you've watched the show before, you'll hear me say many times, use as much or as little pepper as you like. If you want to use something else for flavor, by all means, go ahead and do that. All right, this is browning up pretty good. Little pink left, but we're almost done. Again, you're not trying to cook this, you're just trying to brown it, get it ready to go, and then you'll be ready to add our mixture. When we come back from this first break, we're going to talk about how we're going to mix this, kind of what order you need to mix it with. Order is important, and then we're going to take a look at how we're going to do our cabbage. So we'll be right back, and we'll get this finished up for you, and show you where we're at. All right, we're back, and I'm going to turn the heat right down on this, and we're going to start to add our ingredients. So we're going to take that rice, I'm going to stir that rice in there, get that in there. Again, I've got the heat down very low now, because again, this is going to end up being our mixture. We need to be able to mix that up nicely. We're going to add our spices. I'm going to put that garlic in there, put our dill in there, and our onion, of course. I'm going to turn that actually off now. All right. All right, take a look at that. We'll just get this mixed together. All right. And now we need to get it a little, some wet. So I'm going to actually take a tomato. We're going to end up using our sauce and our tomato soup. But I'm actually going to cut up some actual tomato and put it in there. I've got a nice firm Roma tomato. I'm going to cube it or dice it as best I can anyway. I'm going to throw that in there. All right. All right, we're going to add some tomato sauce. just your typical kind of spaghetti sauce. You can put about half that jar in there for now. Don't want to put too much. You still got to be able to handle it and use it as filling. If it gets a little too wet, then you can turn the heat back on, and that'll absorb it. But now you see it's starting to look like what it's supposed to look like. And I'm just going to make a little space here because we're going to put one of the last important ingredients, and that's an egg. I'm going to put that just to the side, and I'm going to stir it. We'll use this. Break it up a little bit first and kind of a space in the frying pan. And then we'll stir it into our mix. And this is obviously going to give it that stickiness that we're going to need when we want to put it inside the cabbage roll. It doesn't matter again if it's a little bit wet, because the wetness will dry out once you start baking it. I'm going to preheat the oven. We're going to do this at 350. I'll just preheat that for now. We'll get back to that shortly. And there you go. I've turned the heat completely off, so that gives us our mix. And then at this point, you can take a look at it, and if you see that you want to add something else, or you think, oh geez, there's not enough onion in there, or whatever it happens to be, remember it's going to be in the oven, so it'll all cook. Everything in here will be nice and warm and soften up. That's part of the reason why you don't want to completely cook the meat and you don't want to completely cook the rice. Give it a chance to cook and finish up in the oven, and so that it's not saggy and falling out. All right, just going to mix that up a tiny bit. I'm going to put the heat on for just a second, just to absorb some of that wetness. So you can see, if you see what I mean, it's a little wet still. So I'm just going to put the heat on. The heat will absorb some of the wet, and then we will have to cool this, because of course you're going to put it into the cabbage roll. It doesn't have to be cold, but you want to be able to handle it. I know when I watch my mother and the neighbors make these, they were using their hands. So they were grabbing the mixture, stuffing them in the cabbage, and they were just getting their hands right in there. I'll probably use a spoon, but again, however you like to do that will work. So I've just put the heat on for a minute, and that's looking really good. Okay. All right, I'm going to put that to the side, let that cool down a little bit, and we've got our cabbage. So I've got a nice pot. You want to try to pick a pot, obviously, that you're going to need to boil. So I've got something with a lid. Ideally, this is our cabbage. Ideally, a green cabbage if you're cooking typical cabbage rolls. If you want sauerkraut, you can use the sour cabbage, not sauerkraut, but almost said sour pierogies. Sour cabbage you can use if that's what you like, and then you're going to pop that in there. You can pop it in the way it is. If you want to cut the stem to begin, you can. But we're going to pop that in there. We're going to let that boil. And so that's going to boil we want it to boil for about 2 minutes. And then you're going to carefully kind of take it out, use kind of 2 spoons or whatever you like, and then we're going to work at it. So we'll be right back, and we'll get started on our cabbage rolls. All right, welcome back. We've had our cabbage boiling. It's pretty much ready to take a stab at. I'm going to turn this down, but I'm not going to turn it off. The next part's kind of tricky, obviously depending on how much room you have in a kitchen and things like that. I'm going to take this out carefully. Just going to kind of poke it on both sides, try not to burn myself. Just lift it out of there. I'm going to put it here. We could have taken this, the stem out before we put it in the water. I'm just going to cut that out. Makes it way easier to take these leaves off, and then we can cut out some of that vein. You can see that it's pretty much ready. It's fallen off. So before we start to roll some of that, yeah, we're going to have enough leaves. We should be able to get that off nicely. What you want to make sure is you want to cut some of that stem out. This piece here generally will never get soft enough, and it'll just be a big, huge chunk. So you don't have to cut the whole thing, but just kind of see if I can show you there. I'm going to cut along there, cut along there. We're just going to cut this piece out. That's, you could keep this in, but it's going to be very, very tough. So then you're left with kind of that. And so you're just going to take it's literally falling off now, which is fantastic. Same thing, I'm going to cut that stem out of there. I don't have to cut quite as much. There. So once we get a little more into it, I can just cut it straight across like so. And we'll have a perfect round leaf to be able to put our cabbage in. You can see I'm just, once you cut that stem off, the cabbage will literally fall off, which is fantastic. So cut some of that stem off. And obviously we have a fair amount of filling, so you could just keep going. Once I get to a point in the cabbage where the leaves won't come off, I would pop it back in the water. Probably only going to need another minute or so. It would get a few more leaves off. That's just kind of what you do throughout the process. You just kind of keep putting it in there. And it's okay if those cool, because they're going to be obviously easier to handle. So as you can see, it gets a little tighter as you get closer in. Near the bottom there. So I'm going to peel that. And we're good. Okay, I'm going to actually pop that back in to see if we can get some of those other ones loosened up. Put the lid back on that, and that's starting to really take shape. Again, if you wanted to use sour cabbage, you could use sour cabbage. Most of the recipes that I've seen and most of the ones I've used do ask for green cabbage. That's kind of why we're using this. Starting to look like what it should. If you remember our mixture, I'm going to bring that over. Take a look at that. And so as kind of a sample, we'll put a couple in here. Put that cabbage aside. All right, so we've got what we need. I'm going to have to decide which way I want to roll it. You know, I might practice. See, I've got a big piece of stem there. I better cut that off. Where did my cutter go? All right, so probably could go that way, tuck that in. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just doing a little rehearsal for the rolling. So I'm going to take some of that filler. This is cooled down now. Put that in there. Just try to put this back so we can see it. All right, and we'll put a little more in there. Go. Just like anything with that you're going to roll, you want to tuck your ends in as best you can, and then roll, and you're going to place the bottom of the roll down. Now, before we do that, we're going to prep our baking sheet. This is just one that I can cook too. If you want to cook your entire recipe and you have yourself a big casserole dish or a big pan, obviously you can do them all at once. If you want to make them, you want to put 2 or 3 or 4 of these in the oven at a time so that you have a 2 serving, and you want to seal this or put it in the freezer and have a 2 servings. If you have if I was cooking for myself, for instance, I would use a pan like this. I'm going to put a little bit of the tomato soup in the bottom. I'm going to put a little bit of the spaghetti sauce in the bottom. Pretty simple. Mix that up a little bit. And I'm going to put my first cabbage roll in there. Push it down inside. See if we grab another one. It's a little tricky because it's not completely round. All right. I'm going to push this over and start to roll it. I'm going to tuck in the corner, roll, roll, and put the seam down. All right, it's nice. I'm going to take the last of the tomato soup. I'm going to coat that, and we are going to pop it in the oven at 350. It's going to be in there probably somewhere between 40 to 50 minutes, somewhere around there. Again, depending on the strength of your oven. but it should be somewhere around there. Now, we obviously don't have 30 or 40 minutes. I'm going to turn our cabbage off. It's ready. And so we went ahead and cooked a couple of these using the exact same method. And so we've got a couple cabbage rolls ready to go there. And I'm going to use one of my cabbages. I would normally have a plate. I would put that on top of a plate, but we're going to take one of these out. You can see it's nice and messy, yummy, ready to eat. Move that out of the way. We'll open that up, show you, and boom, you've got cabbage roll. Simple, easy recipe. You don't need a lot. It doesn't cost a lot of ingredients. You're not spending a ton of money. Very easy to make. Let the oven do the work. Thanks for joining Open Oven. Hope to see you again.